What if the perfect life was a perfect lie? Odessa Whitlow, 8 months pregnant and married to billionaire Damian Whitlow, believes she had it all. A loving husband, a magnificent home, a baby on the way. But in the glittering world of the super rich, secrets are currency and loyalty is a commodity. When Damian's ambitious mistress, Alawan, steps out of the shadows, Odessa's dream becomes a waking nightmare. One shove, one fall, one shattering loss is all it takes to expose the monster lurking behind the charming facade. This isn't just a story of betrayal, it's a story of a fight for survival. The golden hour bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Whitlow mansion, casting long, distorted shadows across the marble floors. The light, usually a source of comfort for Odessa, felt ominous today, a gilded cage reminding her of her beautiful prison. At 8 months pregnant, her body was a vessel of life, a constant, beautiful reminder of the love she believed she shared with her husband, Damian. The nursery was a masterpiece of muted tones and handcrafted wooden animals, a serene sanctuary waiting for their son, Oliver. But a storm was gathering on the horizon, a tempest named Elowen Rossi. Odessa adjusted the silk maternity gown that flowed over her swollen belly. Damian was hosting another of his essential business dinners. He had insisted she be present, his radiant Madonna, as he'd called her, a trophy to be displayed. The thought soured the taste of the raspberry leaf tea she'd been sipping. For weeks, a creeping unease had woven its way into the fabric of her marriage. It began with late nights at the office, the scent of an unfamiliar, expensive perfume clinging to his suits, and the way his eyes, once so full of adoration, would now slide past her, distant and cold. Her mother, Maggie, had warned her. "Money doesn't buy happiness, Ellie," she'd said, her voice laced with the quiet wisdom of a woman who had known true love and loss. And a man who builds his empire by crushing others will eventually crush what is closest to him. Odessa had dismissed it as motherly concern, her faith in Damian a shield against such cynical thoughts. Now her mother's words echoed in her ears like a prophecy. The name Elowen Rossi had first surfaced as a whisper among the household staff, a new PR executive at Whitlow Industries who was making quite an impression. Then a receipt for a diamond bracelet she'd found in his pocket. A client gift, he'd explained with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But the final, undeniable proof had come from an anonymous email containing a photograph. Damian and a stunning, raven-haired woman, their lips locked in a passionate embrace, on the balcony of a hotel in Monaco, a trip he'd claimed was a solo venture to secure a new algorithm. The betrayal was a physical blow, winding her, stealing the very air from her lungs. She had confronted him, the printed photograph trembling in her hand. He hadn't denied it. Instead, he'd gaslighted her, his voice a chillingly calm cascade of accusations. She was being hysterical, hormonal, her pregnancy making her paranoid. He was a billionaire, for God's sake. Of course, there would be women flinging themselves at him. The photo was a fabrication, a deep fake created by his rivals to destabilize him. He had been so convincing, his performance so flawless, that a sliver of her wanted to believe him. But in the quiet moments of the night, when he slept soundlessly beside her, the truth would whisper its venomous secrets. Tonight, the whispers were a roar. As the first guests arrived, their laughter and the clinking of champagne flutes, a symphony of blissful ignorance, Odessa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She saw him then, standing by the grand piano, a commanding presence in his custom Tom Ford suit, and next to him, laughing up at him with an intimacy that was a slap in the face, was Elowen Rossi. She was even more beautiful in person, her red dress a slash of scarlet against the muted elegance of the room. She looked like she belonged there. Odessa's heart hammered against her ribs. She had to maintain her composure for the sake of her unborn child, for the sake of her own dignity. She moved through the room, a gracious hostess, her smile a carefully constructed mask. But her eyes kept being drawn back to Damian and Elowen. The way he touched the small of her back, the way she leaned in to whisper in his ear, her hand lingering on his arm just a moment too long. It was a brazen public declaration of their affair. Later, as dinner was being served, Odessa found herself seated opposite Elowen, The woman had the audacity to offer her a saccharine smile. Odessa, you look absolutely glowing. Pregnancy suits you. The compliment was a veiled insult, a reminder of what she stood to lose. Thank you, Elawan, Odessa replied, her voice surprisingly steady. I'm sure you're enjoying your first Whitlow dinner party. Elawan's smile widened. Oh, immensely. Damien has been so welcoming. He's an incredible mentor. The word mentor was laced with a dozen other, more intimate meanings. The tension at the table was thick enough to be carved with a knife. Damien, seated at the head, seemed oblivious. Or perhaps he was enjoying the spectacle. He regaled the guests with tales of his latest corporate conquest, his voice booming with self-assurance. But Odessa noticed the fleeting glances he shot between her and Elawan, a glint of amusement in his eyes. He was playing a game, and they were his pawns. After dinner, as the guests mingled, Odessa sought refuge on the terrace, the cool night air a balm on her fevered skin. She leaned against the balustrade, her hands protectively cradling her belly. The city lights twinkled below, a sea of indifferent stars. She had never felt so alone. He'll never leave me, you know. The voice, silky and sharp, startled her. Elawan had followed her out. She stood there, a flute of champagne in her hand, her expression one of smug pity. He might be married to you, Elawan continued, taking a slow sip, but he belongs to me. This life, this house, this power, it's not for someone like you. You're too soft, too simple. Odessa turned to face her, her fear hardening into a cold fury. And you think you're what he wants? A cheap social climbing parasite? Elawan laughed, a sound that was both beautiful and cruel. I'm what he needs. I understand his ambition, his hunger. You're just a pretty incubator for his heir. Once you've served your purpose, she left the sentence hanging in the air, a chilling threat. Get out of my house, Odessa said, her voice low and trembling with rage. It's his house, darling, Elawan purred, stepping closer. And soon it will be mine. The audacity of the woman was breathtaking. Odessa felt a wave of dizziness. The stress of the evening, the emotional turmoil, it was all becoming too much. She had to get away to find a quiet space to breathe. She turned to go back inside, but Elawan blocked her path. Don't walk away from me, Elawan hissed, her mask of civility finally slipping. You need to understand your place. My place is as his wife, Odessa shot back, her voice rising. Something you will never be. In that moment, something in Elawan's eyes snapped. The carefully constructed facade crumbled, revealing a raw, venomous hatred. We'll see about that. The grand staircase was just inside the terrace doors, a sweeping structure of polished mahogany and intricate ironwork. It was Damien's pride and joy, a symbol of his ascent to the pinnacle of wealth and power. As Odessa tried to push past Elawan, the other woman moved with a shocking swiftness. It wasn't a clumsy stumble or an accidental shove. It was a deliberate, calculated act of violence. Elawan's hands, her nails painted a blood red, slammed into Odessa's shoulders. The world tilted on its axis. For a horrifying suspended moment, Odessa was airborne. She saw Elawan's face, a mask of triumphant fury. She saw the blurred faces of the party guests turning towards the commotion. She saw the grand chandelier, its crystals glittering like 1,000 frozen tears. And then, there was only the sickening sensation of falling, the air rushing past her as she tumbled down the unforgiving stairs. Her body hit the marble floor with a series of brutal, sickening thuds. A kaleidoscope of pain exploded through her, sharp and blinding. She was vaguely aware of screams, of gasps of horror from the onlookers, but all she could focus on was the searing, cramping agony in her abdomen. A warm, sticky wetness was spreading beneath her. She looked down. The pale silk of her gown was stained with a horrifying, spreading crimson. Her baby. Oliver. Her eyes frantically searched the crowd, searching for the one person who was supposed to be her protector, her husband. She saw him then, standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at her. His face was a blank canvas, devoid of any emotion. There was no shock, no concern, no love. just a cold, calculating assessment of the situation. He exchanged a look with Alawan, a flicker of understanding passing between them. He was not her savior. He was part of the nightmare. "Damien, please," she whispered, her voice a ragged breath. "The baby." He started to walk down the stairs, his movements unhurried, almost casual. The crowd parted for him, a sea of horrified, silent faces. He reached her, his shadow falling over her broken body. She looked up at him, her eyes pleading for help, for a shred of the man she thought she had married. He knelt, not beside her, but a calculated distance away. He didn't touch her. His voice when he spoke was not for her, but for the audience. "Someone call an ambulance," he said, his tone one of controlled, feigned concern. He looked at her then, his eyes like chips of ice. "What have you done, Odessa?" he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. "Always so clumsy." The lie was a final, devastating blow. He was protecting Alawan. He was framing her. The pain in her body was nothing compared to the agony that ripped through her soul. As the world began to fade to black, her last conscious thought was of the cold, indifferent face of her husband, the man who had not only allowed her to fall, but was now watching her, their unborn child, bleed out on the marble floor of their perfect home. The dream was not just over, it had been a lie from the very beginning. The gilded cage had opened, not to freedom, but to an even more terrifying abyss. The sterile white world of the hospital room swam into focus slowly, agonizingly. The first thing Odessa registered was the silence. The frantic beeping of monitors had been replaced by a low, steady hum. The second was the emptiness. The profound, hollow ache in her womb was a physical manifestation of the chasm that had opened up in her life. Oliver was gone. The thought was a flat, emotionless fact before the tidal wave of grief crashed over her. So immense and powerful, it threatened to drown her. A sob, raw and guttural, tore from her throat. Her body convulsed with the force of it, and a sharp pain lanced through her side, a reminder of the fractured ribs she'd sustained in the fall. Each breath was a fresh agony, each beat of her heart a countdown of the moments her son was no longer with her. Her mother was there, a solid, unwavering presence in the chair beside the bed. Maggie's face was a roadmap of sorrow, her eyes red-rimmed, but her grip on Odessa's hand was firm. "Oh, my baby girl," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. She didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. She simply sat in the wreckage with her daughter, sharing the crushing weight of the silence. The door swished open, and Damien walked in. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his hair perfectly coiffed. He looked less like a grieving husband and father, and more like a man on his way to a board meeting. He carried a bouquet of white lilies, their funereal scent filling the room and making Odessa gag. "Ellie," he began, his voice a carefully rehearsed performance of sorrow. "I am so sorry." Odessa stared at him, a cold, hard knot of hatred forming in the pit of her stomach. "Sorry?" Her voice was a hoarse whisper. "You're sorry?" He placed the lilies on the bedside table and moved closer. "I know you're in pain. We both are. We've suffered a terrible loss." "We?" The word was a venomous dart. "There is no we. There is only you and her and what you both did to me." Damien sighed, the picture of a long-suffering husband. "Odessa, please. The doctor said you're on a lot of medication. You're confused. You had a terrible accident." "It was not an accident," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of its former strength. "She pushed me. And you just watched." He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of performed exhaustion. "Darling, Alawan would never. She was trying to help you. You were dizzy. You stumbled." He was building the narrative, the official story that would protect him, protect his mistress, and erase the truth. Several guests saw it. You were overwrought all evening. Everyone is very concerned for your mental state. The audacity was a physical force, pressing down on her, stealing her breath. He was not just denying the truth. He was actively trying to make her believe she was insane. This was his true nature, laid bare. The charming, loving husband had been a phantom, an illusion. The man standing before her was a monster, cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of a soul. "Get out!" she rasped, turning her face away from him, unable to bear the sight of his handsome, lying face. "Ellie, be reasonable. Get out!" This time her voice cracked like a whip. Maggie stood up, her small frame radiating a formidable maternal fury. "You heard her, Damien," Maggie said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Leave. Now." Damien's mask slipped for a fraction of a second. A flicker of raw anger crossed his features before being replaced by a look of deep, theatrical hurt. "I'll come back when you're feeling more yourself," he said, turning on his heel and striding out of the room. The lilies he left behind seemed to mock her, their white petals like pristine shrouds. The days that followed were a blur of physical pain and emotional numbness. The miscarriage had been brutal, the loss of her son a wound that would never truly heal. But beneath the grief, a new emotion was taking root, a steely resolve. Damien had taken everything from her child, her love, her sense of self. He had tried to break her. But as she lay in that hospital bed, Odessa made a vow. She would not be broken. She would not be silenced. She would have justice for Oliver. Her first visitor, other than her mother, was a surprise. Julian Croft, Damien's head of security, appeared at her door, his expression grim. He was a man of few words, always a silent, watchful presence in the background of her life. "Mrs. Whitlow," he said, his voice a low rumble, I wanted to offer my sincerest condolences." Odessa watched him warily. "Are you here on my husband's orders, Mr. Croft? To manage the situation?" A muscle twitched in Julian's jaw. "I'm here for you," he said, his gaze direct and unwavering. "What happened? It was wrong. I saw it." A flicker of hope ignited in Odessa's chest. "You saw her push me?" He nodded slowly. "I was by the terrace doors. I saw the whole thing. Ms. Rossi deliberately pushed you." The confirmation was a relief, a validation of her sanity. "Will you testify? Will you tell the police what you saw?" Julian hesitated, his eyes clouded with an internal conflict. "It's not that simple, Mrs. Whitlow. Damien, he signs my paycheck, a very generous one. I have a family." The hope flickered and died. Of course, Damien's money bought loyalty, or at least it bought silence. "So you'll let him get away with it? You'll let them destroy my life and say nothing?" "I didn't say that," Julian said, his voice firm. "Damien Whitlow is a powerful man. The police, they are often on the payroll of powerful men. A direct accusation from me would be my word against his and his mistress's. He'd crush me and it wouldn't help you. He'd paint me as a disgruntled employee." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "But there are other ways. Damien has secrets. More secrets than you can possibly imagine. Things that money can't erase. If you want to fight him, you can't do it head on. You have to be smarter. You have to find his weakness." He stood up to leave. "I have access to things. Security logs, financial records. If you decide you want to fight, I can help you find the ammunition. But you have to be sure. Once you start this war, there's no turning back." He placed a small encrypted flash drive on her bedside table. "This is the security footage from the staircase. The main camera was malfunctioning, according to the official report. But I have my own backups. It's not perfect quality, but it shows what happened. It's your insurance policy." With a final meaningful look, he was gone. Odessa stared at the flash drive. It was a lifeline, a weapon, a declaration of war. The grief for her son was a cold, heavy stone in her heart, but now it was surrounded by a white-hot fire of rage. Damien had underestimated her. He had seen her as a soft, simple trophy. He had no idea of the strength that was forged in the fires of betrayal and loss. She picked up the flash drive, her fingers closing around the small hard object. It was time to stop grieving and start fighting. She would not just seek justice for Oliver. She would dismantle Damien Whitlow's entire empire of lies, piece by piece. Her life as the billionaire's wife was over. Her life as his downfall had just begun. When Odessa was finally discharged from the hospital, she didn't return to the opulent mansion she had once called home. That house was a mausoleum, every surface tainted with the memory of her loss in Damien's betrayal. Instead, her mother took her to a small, unassuming apartment that a friend owned, a place tucked away in a quiet tree-lined street, far from the glittering world of the super-rich. It was a sanctuary, a place to heal and to plan. Damien, of course, had tried to stop her. He had shown up at the hospital, all feigned concern and veiled threats. "Ellie, you're not well enough to be on your own. You need to come home, where I can take care of you." "The only thing you want to take care of, Damien, is your reputation," she had replied, her voice devoid of the emotion he expected. "I'm not coming back." His face had hardened. "Don't be foolish. You're my wife. Your place is with me." "I've retained a lawyer, Damien. The divorce papers will be served tomorrow." The fury in his eyes had been volcanic, but he'd quickly masked it with a condescending pity. "You're making a huge mistake, Odessa. You have nothing. I made you. I can unmake you just as easily." "We'll see," she'd said, turning her back on him for what she vowed would be the last time. The first few weeks were a struggle. The grief was a constant companion, ambushing her in quiet moments. The sight of a mother with a baby, a glimpse of a toy in a shop window, anything could trigger a fresh wave of despair. But her mother was her rock, her quiet strength a constant source of support, and the fire of her anger, her thirst for justice, was a powerful fuel. With the help of her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named a friend had recommended, she began to build her case. But it was a daunting task. Damien's lawyers were a formidable, expensive team who immediately went on the offensive, painting Odessa as an unstable, vindictive woman, lashing out after a tragic accident. They contested the divorce petition, claiming Damien was a devoted husband, desperate to help his wife through her mental health crisis. The security footage Julian had given her was their trump card. They watched it together in the lawyer's office, the grainy black and white images playing out the nightmare. There it was, Elowen's deliberate two-handed shove. It was damning. "This is it," her lawyer said, her voice grim. "This is what we need." But when they presented it as part of their initial filing, Damien's team was ready. They produced a forensic expert who claimed the footage had been doctored, that the pixels had been manipulated. He presented a slick, convincing report filled with technical jargon that was designed to confuse and overwhelm. They argued that the footage from Julian Croft, a recently fired-for-cause employee, was an act of revenge. They were turning her own evidence against her. Odessa felt a chill of despair. Damien's power was like a hydra. For every head she cut off, 2 more grew in its place. He was not just fighting her in the legal arena, he was fighting her in the court of public opinion. News articles began to appear, curated by Elowen's PR machine. They were subtle at first, expressing concern for the reclusive Mrs. Whitlow, hinting at a history of emotional instability. Anonymous sources spoke of her erratic behavior in the months leading up to the accident. They were slowly, methodically assassinating her character, laying the groundwork to discredit her completely. It was then that Odessa knew she had to follow Julian's advice. She couldn't win a straight fight. She had to find the secrets he had spoken of, the cracks in Damien's carefully constructed facade. She contacted Julian through a secure, encrypted messaging app. He responded almost immediately. They met in a crowded, noisy coffee shop, the anonymity of the setting a shield. "He's trying to bury me, Julian," she said, her voice low. "He's twisting everything." "I told you he would," Julian replied, his face serious. "He controls the narrative. You need to find a truth he can't spin." He slid a plain manila envelope across the table. "I can't be seen giving you anything else. This is all I can do. After this, you're on your own." Her heart pounded as she took the envelope. "What is it?" "It's a key, not a physical one. A name. A project Damien was involved in years ago, before he became the tech titan he is today. It was called Project Icarus. He buried it deep. Everyone involved was paid off or scared into silence. If you can find out what it was, you'll have him." "Project Icarus," she repeated. "What did it do?" "That's for you to find out," Julian said, standing up. "Be careful, Odessa. He's more dangerous than you know." The hunt for Project Icarus became her obsession. It was a ghost. There was no mention of it online, no record in any of Damien's official company histories. It was as if it had never existed. Odessa spent countless hours in the small apartment, poring over old tech journals, news articles, and forum posts from the early days of Damien's career. Her background as a curator had honed her research skills, her ability to find connections and follow faint trails. The first breakthrough came from a disgruntled former employee she found on a niche tech forum. He was bitter, claiming Damien had stolen his ideas. In a long, rambling post, he mentioned a vanity project Damien had poured millions into, something about predictive analytics, before abruptly shutting it down. He didn't use the name Icarus, but the timeline matched. Odessa, using a pseudonym, engaged him in a private message. It took days of careful coaxing, of playing to his ego and his sense of injustice, but he finally gave her another piece of the puzzle. The name of a lead programmer on the project, a man named Ben Carter, who had reportedly had a complete breakdown after the project was shuttered and had disappeared from the tech world entirely. Finding Ben Carter was even harder. He had gone completely off the grid. Odessa felt like she was hitting a dead end. The legal bills were mounting, and her mother was growing more and more concerned about her all-consuming quest. "Ellie, maybe it's time to let it go," Maggie urged one evening, placing a bowl of soup in front of her that she knew Odessa wouldn't eat. "You have enough to fight the divorce. Let the lawyers handle it. This is destroying you." "It's the only thing keeping me alive, Mom," Odessa whispered, her eyes burning from staring at the computer screen. "If I stop, he wins. He gets to walk away with her after killing my son. I can't let that happen." Her breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While looking through old photos from her marriage, a shoebox full of memories that now felt like they belonged to someone else, she found a picture from a company retreat years ago. In the background, partially obscured, was a man with kind eyes and a familiar face. On the back, Damien's handwriting listed the names of the people in the photo. Ben Carter. She remembered Damien talking about him once, with a dismissive wave of his hand. Brilliant programmer, a bit of a head case, couldn't handle the pressure. She remembered something else too, a casual mention of where Ben grew up, a small, forgotten town in rural Oregon. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was all she had. Using public records databases and social media, she began her search, and she found him. He was no longer a programmer. He was living under a different name, working as a carpenter in that same small town. She knew she had to go and see him. It was a risk. If Damien found out, he would surely try to stop her. But what did she have left to lose? She booked a flight, telling only her mother that she was going away for a few days to clear her head. The man who opened the door to the rustic cabin was a shadow of the person in the photograph. His hair was graying, and his face was etched with lines of a deep, abiding sadness. He looked at her with suspicion, his eyes guarded. "Are you Ben Carter?" she asked, her heart in her throat. "I don't know who you're talking about," he said, his voice rusty. He started to close the door. "Project Icarus," she said quickly. "I know about Project Icarus. I was married to Damien Whitlow." His hand froze on the door. The color drained from his face. He stared at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else. Recognition. He slowly opened the door. "You'd better come in," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "And you'd better tell me everything." Inside the cabin, surrounded by the scent of sawdust and wood smoke, Ben Carter finally told her the truth about Project Icarus. It wasn't just about predictive analytics. It was a sophisticated AI-driven surveillance program designed to scrape personal data on an unimaginable scale. It could predict, with terrifying accuracy, people's behavior, their weaknesses, their breaking points. It was a tool of mass manipulation. "We thought we were changing the world," Ben said, his voice trembling. "Damien sold us on the dream, predicting market trends, stopping financial crashes, even preventing terrorist attacks. But that wasn't his goal." "What was his goal?" Odessa asked, her blood running cold. "Control," Ben said. "He wanted to use it to influence elections, to destroy business rivals, to blackmail politicians. It was the most dangerous weapon I had ever seen. When I realized the true scope of it, I tried to blow the whistle. I went to the board, to the media." He let out a hollow laugh. "Damien was always one step ahead. He had Icarus running on me, on my team. He knew our every move before we made it. He knew my secrets, my fears. He used them to destroy my credibility. He framed me for embezzlement, leaked falsified psychiatric reports to the press. He made it look like I had a psychotic breakdown. He ruined me, my career, my marriage, everything. He looked at Odessa, his eyes filled with a deep, haunted pain. He didn't just shut the project down. He took the source code. He has a private, more powerful version of it that he still uses. It's the source of his power. It's how he anticipates every threat, how he neutralizes every rival. It's how he knew what you were going to do. Odessa finally understood. Damien hadn't just been gaslighting her. He had been using his monstrous creation against her. He knew her vulnerabilities, her deepest fears. He had likely predicted her every reaction to his affair, to the confrontation, to the loss of their child. He hadn't been indifferent. He had been in control. "Can you prove it?" she asked, her voice shaking with the enormity of the revelation. "Do you have any evidence? Anything left from the original project?" Ben shook his head sadly. He wiped everything, or so he thinks. He walked over to an old dusty footlocker in the corner of the room. He opened it and pulled out a heavily worn laptop. "I kept a back door, a kill switch, a single piece of code that could expose the entire system and bring it crashing down. I was always too afraid to use it. He promised me that if I kept my mouth shut, he'd leave me alone. But seeing you, knowing what he did to you, to your child," he handed the laptop to Odessa. "The code is on here, but be warned, using it will be like setting off a nuclear bomb in his life. The fallout will be immense. He will come after you with everything he has." Odessa took the laptop. It felt heavier than its physical weight. It held the key to Damien's destruction, but also her own potential ruin. She looked at Ben Carter, a man whose life had been shattered by the same monster who had destroyed hers. "He's already taken everything from me," she said, her voice hard as steel. "I have nothing left to lose." As she left the small town in Oregon, the laptop, her precious cargo, she knew the final act of her tragedy was about to begin. It was no longer just about justice for Oliver. It was about liberating the world from the unseen chains of a tyrant. She was no longer just a grieving wife. She was the ghost in Damien Whitlow's machine, and she was about to pull the plug. The flight back from Oregon was a study in suspended animation. Odessa sat perfectly still, the worn canvas of her carry-on bag pressed against her leg, the laptop within a palpable weight. Each bout of turbulence sent a jolt of adrenaline through her, a primal fear that the plane might fall from the sky, taking the key to Damien's destruction with it. She was a vessel for a reckoning, a ghost carrying a digital bomb, and the gravity of her mission settled over her, cold and absolute. She was terrified, but it was a crystalline fear, sharp and clear, a stark contrast to the suffocating, nebulous dread that had been her constant companion for weeks. This was the fear of a soldier before a battle they had chosen, a battle they knew they had to fight. The moment she stepped back into the anonymous safety of the apartment, the tension that had been coiled within her began to unwind, replaced by an urgent, humming energy. Her mother, Maggie, met her at the door, her face a canvas of love and apprehension. She didn't need to ask if the trip was successful. She saw the answer in the fierce, new light in her daughter's eyes. "Ellie," Maggie began, her hands fluttering nervously as Odessa placed the laptop on the small dining table, with the reverence of a high priestess laying an artifact on an altar. "Are you sure? Once you do this, there's no going back. Not for you, not for him." Odessa looked up from the machine, her gaze meeting her mother's. "There was never any going back, Mom. Not from the moment I saw him standing at the top of those stairs. The life I had is gone. The woman I was is gone." She placed a hand on her still tender abdomen. "He took my future. He took Oliver. Going back isn't an option. The only way is through." She sat down, her posture straight, her movements deliberate. The old laptop whirred to life, a relic from a past she was about to resurrect and weaponize. Ben's instructions were a complex ballet of commands and passwords, a digital ghost key he had spent years perfecting in his self-imposed exile. It was designed not just to unlock a door, but to blow the entire fortress to smithereens. When activated, It would simultaneously clone and release every damning file from Damien's private Janus server, sending the irrefutable proof of financial manipulation, illegal surveillance, political blackmail, to a curated list of the world's most powerful watchdogs. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the SEC, the FBI, and, for maximum internal chaos, the private inboxes of every member of Whitlow Industries' board of directors and its largest institutional investors. It was a weapon of mutually assured corporate destruction. "He will know it was you," Maggie whispered, her hand resting on Odessa's shoulder, a silent offering of strength. "Good," Odessa said, her voice a low, steady hum. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Let him. I want him to know. When his world is burning, when the walls are crashing down, I want him to see my face in the flames." A single hot tear escaped her eye and traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of furious release. It was for Oliver. This was the only eulogy she could give him, the only justice. With a final, shuddering breath, she pressed the enter key. Command executed. The message blinked on the screen, stark and simple. For 3 heartbeats, the world was silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant wail of a city siren. Nothing happened. A sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, pierced Odessa's resolve. Had it failed? Had Damien somehow anticipated even this? Then it began. Her phone, lying face down on the table, buzzed once. A news alert. It buzzed again, and again, and again. The vibrations escalating until the phone was dancing on the tabletop, a frantic, insistent alarm. She flipped it over. The screen was a cascade of breaking news notifications, a digital torrent that mirrored the data dump she had just unleashed. The dam had not just broken, it had been obliterated. She grabbed the remote and turned on the television. Every major news network was in a frenzy. The first reports were cautious, anchors speaking in grave tones about unverified documents and a massive anonymous data leak. But the evidence was too specific, too overwhelming to be dismissed. On one channel, a flustered financial analyst was staring at his tablet, his eyes wide with disbelief as he tried to process the revelation that Whitlow Industries' last quarter earnings had been artificially inflated. On another, a political correspondent was reading a transcript of a recorded call, the voice unmistakably Damien's, discussing how to use Janus to blackmail a senator who was blocking a lucrative government contract. Ben's ghost key had unlocked everything. Internal emails, secret off-ledger accounts, audio files, and the terrifying source code of Janus itself. It was a digital apocalypse, and it was all playing out in real time. "Oh my God," Maggie breathed, sinking into a chair. By morning, the story had morphed from a corporate scandal into a global firestorm. The headlines were brutal. Whitlow Industries implodes amidst massive surveillance scandal. Billionaire tycoon Damien Whitlow, accused of blackmail, fraud, and orchestrating a weaponized AI. The New York Stock Exchange took the unprecedented step of halting all trading of Whitlow stock to prevent a total market collapse. But it was too late. The company's value had been wiped out in the pre-market hours. The FBI had announced a formal investigation. The board of directors was in an emergency session from which the news anchor speculated no one's career would survive. Damien's carefully constructed universe, built on a foundation of secrets and control, was burning to the ground on live television. Odessa watched it all, a strange, hollow calm settling in her core. She had done it. She had pulled the pin, and the world had exploded. The knock on her apartment door came around noon. It wasn't a polite rap. It was a violent, percussive pounding that vibrated through the floor. It could only be one person. Maggie rushed to the door. "Ellie, don't!" But Odessa was already on her feet, her expression serene. "It's okay, Mom. Let him in." Maggie reluctantly opened the door, and Damien stormed in. He was a man flayed alive by circumstance. The impeccable Tom Ford suit was rumpled, his tie askew. His eyes were bloodshot pits in a face pale with sleepless, volcanic rage. The charismatic titan of industry was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal. He stalked past Maggie as if she were a piece of furniture, his burning gaze fixed on Odessa. "You!" he hissed, the word a venomous dart. He pointed a trembling finger at her, his whole body shaking with a barely contained fury. This was you. Me? Odessa replied. Her voice was as calm and cool as his was hot and ragged. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, played it over and over in the desolate theater of her mind. No, Damien, I think you'll find it was Ben Carter, and the ghost of that senator you blackmailed, and the shareholders you defrauded, and the dozens of other people whose lives you meticulously dismantled for your own gain. I just opened the door and let them all in for a family reunion. He took another step towards her, his fists clenched at his sides. You have no idea what you've done, he seethed, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. You've ruined me. You were already ruined, Damien, she said, her calm and impenetrable shield against his rage. She didn't flinch, didn't give him the satisfaction of a single step back. You were just too arrogant and too insulated by your own lies to see it. You built your empire on a bedrock of secrets. I just turned on the light. His face twisted into a mask of pure, undiluted hatred. I will destroy you for this, he snarled, the threat rattling with the desperation of a king whose throne had just been turned to ash. I will spend every last cent I have to see you penniless and alone. I will drag your name through the mud until no one in this world will even look at you without spitting. Threats, Damien? Is that all you have left? A sad, knowing smile touched her lips. You have nothing left to threaten me with. Your money is a phantom, frozen and worthless. Your name is poison. And as for being alone, I have been utterly alone since the day I finally realized the man I loved was a monster. Her voice cracked then, the icy composure finally breaking to reveal the raw wound beneath. I have been alone since the day you stood at the top of those stairs, looking down at me bleeding on the marble, and chose her. You chose your image. You chose your secrets. You watched our son die, Damien, and you did nothing. The mention of their child, of Oliver, was the one blow that seemed to land. It broke through the wall of narcissistic rage and struck something human within him. His face slackened, the fury momentarily extinguished by a flicker of genuine, agonizing pain. He looked for a fleeting second, like a man truly lost. I didn't, he began, his voice breaking, the words catching in his throat. I never wanted that to happen. But it did, Odessa whispered, her own tears now flowing freely. It did happen, and in the only moment that ever truly mattered, you weren't my husband. You weren't his father. You were just a man assessing a PR problem. The apartment door, which Maggie hadn't had time to close, burst open again. This time it was two grim-faced detectives, and standing just behind them, his expression a mask of stoic resolve, was Julian Croft. Damien's head snapped towards them, his gaze locked on Julian, his shock instantly curdling into a look of profound, venomous betrayal. You, he breathed. Julian met his former boss's stare without flinching. His duty to Damien was over. His duty to the truth was all that remained. Damien Whitlow, the lead detective said, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent room. You're under arrest for obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. As the officers moved forward, Damien's eyes never left Julian's. He looked like a fallen god, betrayed by his most trusted Praetorian. As the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, the sound was deafening, a final metallic punctuation mark on the end of his reign. At that exact moment, Eloise Rossi's perfectly made-up face appeared on the television screen behind him. She was standing on the steps of Whitlow Tower, surrounded by a mob of reporters holding an impromptu press conference. She was a masterclass in calculated sorrow, dabbing at her dry, beautiful eyes with a tissue. I had no idea about any of this, she lamented, her voice trembling with practiced sincerity. Mr. Whitlow, Damien, he manipulated me, just as he manipulated everyone. I am just as much a victim in this as his poor, suffering wife. She looked directly into the camera, a lone tear finally escaping and tracing a perfect path down her cheek. I will, of course, be cooperating fully with the FBI's investigation. Odessa let out a short, bitter laugh, the consummate parasite expertly detaching herself from her dying host and already auditioning for her next role. It was a disgusting, brilliant performance. But it didn't matter anymore. Elawan was a symptom. Damien was the disease. And the disease had just been excised. As the detectives led a stunned, defeated Damien out of her apartment and out of her life, a profound silence descended. The shouting on the television, the rage of the confrontation, the finality of the arrest, it all faded away, leaving only the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the gentle sound of her mother's breathing beside her. The war was over. The cost had been immeasurable. But as she looked out the window at the gray city sky, for the first time in a very long time, Odessa Whitlow felt the possibility of sunlight. Odessa Whitlow's story is a harrowing reminder that the most pristine surfaces can hide the deepest rot. She lost her child, her husband, and the life she knew, all because of the insatiable greed and cruelty of one man. But from the depths of that unimaginable loss, she found a strength she never knew she had. She refused to be a victim. She fought back, not with weapons or wealth, but with the one thing her billionaire husband could never control, the truth. Her fight for justice for her son, Oliver, became a beacon for countless others trapped in silence. If Odessa's journey from heartbreak to heroism moved you, please show your support. Like this video to help her story reach others, share it to spread awareness about hidden abuse, and subscribe to our channel for more true-life dramas that need to be told. Your engagement helps us give a voice to the survivors.